Today, if you have an opinion that some consider to be wrong, you are viciously attacked in social media. There's even violence.
Right now in the culture, it's dangerous to hold certain views. Over the last 3 years, 26 states really pushed to amend their legislation to have more donors be disclosed. If you're on a government list, you leave yourself vulnerable to attack.
There's always a temptation to try to use the power of government to silence ideas you don't like, and conservatives sometimes fall for that as well. But for the most part, this has been a liberal phenomenon.
People, I think, keep forgetting the success of the civil rights movement hinged on the idea of donor privacy. The NAACP refused to give Alabama its list of donors, and Alabama would not allow it to work in its borders. That's nothing more than using state coercion to try to thwart a private group from achieving civil society aims, in this case, a less segregated society.
Fast forward to today, where more and more states are demanding this exposure of donors, there is still a threat of harm, whether that's Brendan Eich getting fired from Mozilla.
Why? Because he made a $1,000 contribution. That donation contribution had absolutely nothing to do with his company, the work that he did there, or anything else.
He had contributed to Proposition 8, which was the same-sex marriage debate in California. What's particularly troubling, he had contributed something like 7 years before, which meant you had individuals combing through records of past life that you now have to pay for by losing the company that you started.
By using the disclosure information to harass individual donors,
We cannot tolerate it. Your message.
Disclosure's being used by people who say, I hate that speech. I know I hate that speech and I want to stop it.
When people get afraid to speak up because of repercussions, it can silence a whole side of the debate.
Part of the intent of these things is to drive people out of public debate and reduce the number and the types of voices we hear.
When you earlier introduced a version of this act, you stated that the, quote, the deterrent effect should not be underestimated. So I think you do recognize that there can be a deterrent effect.
Let me tell you, I think it's good when somebody is trying to influence government for their purposes, directly with ads and everything else. It's good to have a deterrent effect.
Frankly, that last point is exactly the goal, to drive ideas out of the marketplace.
Alec was the subject of harassment, intimidation, and exposure of our donors. We've had death threats. When you see these intimidation tactics firsthand, you realize the chilling effect that it can have on an individual who doesn't have a support structure like we do.
A lot of times we see legislators or activists want this information because they believe transparency will solve corruption.
General transparency is really good, particularly in our political process. That's why the Federal Election Commission requires every donation eventually to be made public. I can find out very quickly who's supporting which candidate, and that makes sense.
When it comes to political giving, that's all regulated and it's all disclosed. I know, I was chairman of the Federal Election Commission. I saw the reports.
But when it comes to your church, your private charities, that's very much a different kind of decision. It's something that ought to be between you and the cause you want to celebrate, whether it's a Heritage Foundation on the conservative side or a Brookings Institution on the liberal side.
Donors who don't have the time to speak themselves on public issues support the work of others. If these groups that I often draw on for information or analysis, if they didn't exist, I would have a much harder job. To the extent that these groups continue to be able to collect resources and offer their donors a certain amount of privacy because they don't want to be attacked, that helps the general debate, which is what we're all about.
We are in a precarious situation when it comes to donor privacy.
The power of the First Amendment, and the founders knew this, is to protect the unpopular ideas. Not the ideas of the elite, but the ones that we don't agree with. Certainly in the last 5 years, this culture has changed dramatically. This is why we need to protect everyone's right to support causes they believe in.
If we lose donor privacy, I think we lose one of the most important aspects of civil society. which is the ability of individuals freely to associate with one another, to use their dollars, to use their time, to address civil society problems. If we don't do that, then government does it for us, and we lose the entire notion of a free, democratic, free enterprise system.